Today, we are watching an informative video about evolution by Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan. Oh, Lord. I just want to say before we begin that in all likelihood, I will be pausing this every few seconds to respond because when you're dealing with Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, the information comes fast and we'll need a lot of responses. If you don't like that kind of thing, if you get frustrated or annoyed, I understand. You don't have to watch this video. That's why I've included the link to this video in the description. This part specifically begins at 38:47. If frequent pausing doesn't bother you, well, enjoy.
But if evolution is real, and if there is this constant, I don't know, but it's visible. Like you can measure it in certain animals.
You can measure adaptation.
Yeah,
but there's no evidence that evolution. In fact, I think we've.
Okay, first pause. Evolution is adaptation. Evolution is just species adapting to their environments and surviving because of it. That's it. That's all it is. Adaptation in species is evolution. That's it. That easy.
Kind of given up on the idea of evolution. The theory of evolution as articulated by Darwin is like kind of not true. Right?
In what sense?
Well, in the most basic sense, the idea.
Okay, before we continue, I have to again pause to give... I told you there were going to be a lot of pauses. I have to give a clarification here. He's kind of right and kind of wrong. See, Charles Darwin was not, in fact, evolution Jesus. That's how he's right. Charles Darwin was not the be-all, end-all of evolution, as I have to remind people all the time. Charles Darwin just had a really great idea, the theory of evolution by natural selection, which turns out to be mostly correct as a mechanism for evolution to happen. But there are other things involved, like genetics, and there are other things involved other than that even. So he's correct in that sense. He's wrong in some other major senses, which we are about to talk about in a second.
That, all life emerged from a single cell organism and over time, and there would be a fossil record of that, and there's not. And
yes, there is. There is a fossil record of that, and there isn't a fossil record of starting at the first organism to ever live, because how would there be? All the way up to, like, the Cambrian explosion and what came just before that, because, yes, we do have fossils just before that point as well. And, we have plenty of examples of the evolution of species in the fossil record, but more importantly, we have DNA. DNA is important because DNA shows the shared ancestry of all species on Earth. Through DNA, we can conclusively determine that all species share a common ancestor.
There's not a fossil record of transitionary species, like species that are adapting to its environment.
There's
and
tons of record of adaptation, and you see it in your own life. I mean, I have a lot of dogs.
Oh my God, so he's using adaptation to avoid using evolution. This is something they do frequently. I mean, so in, I think, 1998 or 9, in Kentucky, they changed the standards, which said they changed evolution to change over time. It's like they think if they change the words that are used, they change the entire idea. But no, whether you use evolution, adaptation, or change over time, you are describing the same idea.
I see adaptation in dogs, through the litter to litter. But no, there's no evidence at all that zero, that people evolve seamlessly from a single cell amoeba. No, there's not. There's not.
What do you mean? First of all, evolved seamlessly. What's seamless about the process of evolution? Evolution is by default not a seamless process. There are plenty of seams to that process, but what does he mean, like, there's no evidence of that happening? We can trace our ancestry back through fossil records alone, millions and millions of years. And then we can take on genetics and determine things like the common ancestor of humans and pigs probably lived about 80 million years ago, during the era of dinosaurs. That's what we can determine through DNA. Now, one can imagine just how much further back you can go with DNA. How much further back you can determine things with DNA. I think we share, what, like 85 to 90% of our DNA with pigs? So that's a lot of DNA shared between them, isn't it? And one can imagine, you keep going back, you keep going to different species further and further back in time. Eventually, it all has to go to something, doesn't it? How else is that going to happen, Tucker?
There's no chain in the fossil record of that at all. And that's why you don't actually hear people, you hear them make reference to evolution because the theory of adaptation is clearly, obviously true.
There is no theory of adaptation. You are just talking about and describing the theory of evolution, which, for all of our people out there who don't know, explains the fact of evolution. You see, theory in a scientific sense has a very different meaning than theory in the colloquial sense. In the colloquial sense, the everyday sense, theory just means a guess. You know, you're just making a guess. In science, a theory is the explanation for a fact, for something observed. The theory of gravitation explains the fact that gravity exists. It tries to explain what causes gravity, what is the mechanism underlying gravity that we experience in nature. Evolution works the same way. The theory of evolution explains the fact, the observed fact of evolution.
But Darwin's theory's totally that's why it's still a theory almost 200 years later.
Wrong. If you didn't know this, theories, fun fact, are never upgraded to facts or laws or anything like that. That's not how that works. A theory will always be a theory because, again, a theory explains a fact. You never in fact, a theory is pretty much the highest form of science. To say something is factual, well, that doesn't require much sciencing, does it? You can just kind of observe something happening and say, well, that's a fact. That's not the highest form in science. The highest form in science is the explanation of something, what underlies something. So, Jesus Christ, dude. Oh, I told you, didn't I? This is going to be like it's a hell trip, isn't it?
You know, no, we have not found that at all. And I can't even guess. I mean, I have my own theories on it, but they're not proven.
What are your theories?
God created people.
There we go. That's all it is. And let's be honest. Does anybody actually think Tucker Carlson believes the words coming out of his mouth right now? He is many things. A lot of them terrible, some of them neutral. Terrible, a right-wing propagandist who loves the Russians and Donald Trump, I guess. But one thing I don't think you can say about Tucker Carlson is that he's an idiot. I don't think Tucker Carlson is an idiot. I think he's a smart man. He has to be smart to lie so blatantly, so openly, in so many ways, get so much wrong, and still be viewed as like a lion of his people, basically. So he has to be a smart guy. And I would like to think that he's smart enough to understand how evolution works, and he's just playing a character. Now, if you have followed this channel for a while, I did a video maybe a month or two ago where I pointed out that at one point in time, about, 13 years ago, I did some improv where I just played a creationist. I just sat down and started making shit up, just being like, I think I have good evidences as to why creationism is true. And it was a really fun bit. It was really great. And I think that video, if any of you saw it, really explains or really shows how easy it is to just make shit up about evolution being wrong and creationism being true if you are smart enough, if you know enough about it. I think that's what Tucker Carlson's doing here. I don't think he actually believes a word coming out of his mouth right now.
You know, distinctly, and animals. I mean, I think that's what every person on Earth thought until the mid-19th century, actually.
Right, but
it's not a new idea.
They didn't.
What is up with that laugh? That is a weird misplaced. Normally, laughs are supposed to like break tension. But that laugh just, sent it through the roof, didn't it?
They didn't have computers. They didn't have a general understanding that we have today of the process.
Do you think we understand more now?
Yes.
Really?
You don't think that we understand more today?
We understand way less. We understand so little that we're actually sitting here allowing, a bunch of greedy, stupid, childless.
Okay, before he continues insulting feminists, which is what he's no doubt about to do, because it's that easy to know what Tucker Carlson is about to do. Again, this is another example where he obviously doesn't believe what is coming out of his mouth right now. Now, we're getting past the evolution bit of the conversation, I think, and hope, so hopefully I won't have to deal with this much longer, and I can let you go, because I know this has been an exercise in terrible frustration already in just, 3 minutes of video? 2 minutes of video? 2 minutes of theirs, 9 minutes of mine? So, anyway, just, this is another example of him just, lying. He's lying. He knows that's not the case. You go back to like the 1850s, and we were using like what, steamboats, and we had like lanterns. Electricity wasn't going to be a thing in even big cities for many decades to come, right? I don't think they had it by then. I think the electricity, the electrification of cities started in like what, the late 1800s? Whereas, you know, today I can record a video in my room, put it on the internet, and potentially years or decades from now, you out there could be watching it from anywhere in the world except like North Korea. That's pretty incredible. But also, if you're here decades in the future, I must ask how, and I must also say, well, hi. But you get my point. You get my point, and there's no way Tucker Carlson really believes the words that are coming out of his mouth about the 1800s being more advanced.
Software engineers in Northern California to, like, flirt with the extinction of mankind.
Okay, I gotta say, we actually agree here. But that's not surprising, other than I was expecting this to be a setup to go after the feminists, because he does that a lot. Now, I agree right here, but that's not surprising because Tucker Carlson is really good at this left-wing complaint plus right-wing solution thing. It's what he's good at. It's the National Socialist thing. He'll go like, you know, this is not a real example, obviously, because he hates universities, but it works as a starter. The cost of university is too high, which is why we must spin the bigotry wheel, push all trans people off of bridges. So we agree that software engineers are bad. If you are a software engineer, I do not think highly of you because of the things that you help enable. So we're on the same page here, but I think his solution would be very different than mine. Mine would be, it's time to break up the tech companies and probably, honestly, like ban some of them and regulate them much more harshly. But I think Tucker's would be like, and that's why we have to ban Indians from the country or something like that. So we agree on the problem a little bit here, but not so much on the solutions.
So no, previous generations would be like, what? No, stop. And we're not doing that because
but
we
they
know...
wouldn't have done that even with the nuclear bomb. I mean, obviously the Manhattan Project was done in secrecy, but they wouldn't have stopped it because the imperative of getting this weapon before Hitler got the weapon was what it was.
Well, Hitler
on
was kind of
mind.
done by then. The Russians had pretty much extinguished any hope that that would continue. But
not by the time the Manhattan Project started. I mean, granted, everybody expected the Nazis to just overwhelm the Soviet Union, and when they didn't completely destroy the Soviet Union in like the amount of time it took them to do that to France, people were like, okay, well, this may be a little bit more complicated than that. But I don't think Germany was really like necessarily defeated until what, 43, and the Manhattan Project started in what, like 41 or something. So yeah, I don't think it's really that simple, my guy. But also, I think we could also say, you know, Joe Rogan actually had a good point here. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it, folks? And yes, I understand we have gone far afield the original issue here, but it's like, it's a beautiful train wreck that I just can't look away from. I love seeing this whole conversation unfold because, wow, this is the kind of conversation people are actually having right now. Isn't it perplexing, everyone?
Not
but
at
no,
the
but
beginning of the
we were in the
project.
middle of the logic of war.
At the commencement of the Manhattan Project.
For sure. But the logic was the same, and it was, 4 years of got to beat the other guy, got it.
But one could easily point to other times in human history where we have allowed things that maybe were not necessarily like optimal for the time. I mean, think about the industrial revolutions, for example. The industrial revolutions, they were great, sort of. But they also put like a lot of people out of work, a lot of industries out of work. Sure, a lot of people got work because of them, but I mean, they changed like entire economies of entire nations and indeed the whole world. And yet we allowed that to happen. I mean, we have always allowed these super transformative things without thinking too much about what they would do because progress just marches on regardless. If not us, then who? Because somebody else will do the things that we are afraid to do. Now, when it comes to social media, obviously, I don't think that matters as much because, like, China can't really take the lead from us here. They can't just run with it. They can't just go with it. I mean, I guess they could in some respects. TikTok, for example, is a Chinese product, but When I think about, like, domestically and stuff, they can't do that. But when I think about stuff like AI, like, what are we going to do about that? If we stop with AI, then AI is going to become this incredible, just astronomical economy builder for a country like China. And so, yeah, we do, like, let these things just run roughshod over us. We've done this for a very long time. Technological advancement has always essentially boiled down to, if we don't get the advantage, someone else will. And if someone else gets the advantage, it could be very bad for us. So, yeah, I don't see why... I don't think there's much validity to his argument here, as much as I dislike tech for what it has done to us as a species. Like, yeah, I guess Joe Rogan has won me over on this one, fellas.
And I don't mean to sound too judgmental about the bomb. I know why they built it, okay? But you just wonder why nobody in the middle of that thought, is this really a gun? And some of them did think it. Actually.
I'm sure they did.
Yes,
I mean,
did.
Oppenheimer himself.
Of course.
Well, after they were dropped, he certainly did. Once he realized, oh, my God, we're going to use these things, and maybe unnecessarily so. But I think some people definitely were thinking a lot more of it, like Klaus Fuchs. The guy was obviously, like, spying for the Soviets. He had pretty good reason for that. He was talking about the balance of power. He was a communist, of course, but he wanted the balance of power to remain so that no one power had the advantage in nuclear weapons, because it was obviously dangerous if one power did. Yeah, this is actually a pretty good discussion here. Now, the evolution thing, that was stupid. This I like.
Large organizations don't respond to the moral qualms of individuals very well. So that was, whatever, it's well known what happened. But no, we should pause and ask, is the machine we're building worth having? And nobody seems to do that. And there are all kinds of economic forces, which nobody ever mentions, that drive that heedlessness, that stupidity. Like California, for example, is completely, the state both of us have lived in, is like collapsing. Yeah. And they're betting everything on AI. For the tax base is going to be dependent on this technology working.
Is that really what they're betting on?
Of course.
I got to ask, like, California slander aside, which, by the way, California is the best state. I gotta ask, what does he mean, like, pause it? What does he want to pause exactly? Is he wanting to pause social media? Is he wanting to pause AI develop? What is he wanting to pause? This is another thing about Tucker Carlson. Like, he'll have ideas come out that sound downright reasonable at times, but of course they don't come with, like, the details. I think, like, a lot of people would say, yes, let's pause whatever. Social media needs a good pause, or AI needs a good pause. I think you could say that those are reasonable enough opinions. But what is the purpose of the pause? What are we going to do with that time exactly? What does he want to achieve with this? And that's, the devil is always in the details. And with Tucker Carlson, it's always a pretty big devil in those details.
Of course, that AI is.
Did you see the most recent thing about the amount of billions of dollars they spent on the homeless problem with no trackable results?
Well, they've had massive results. They've increased the homeless population dramatically. If you pay for something, you get more of it. And that would include fentanyl addicts. Oh, absolutely. It's been a wild success.
Okay, so let's end it here, because we've gone pretty far out of our range of what I wanted to discuss, which was just the evolution thing, but it captivated me for a minute. Although I must note one last thing here about the homelessness conversation. Obviously, in America, homelessness is a real problem, and in a state like California, it is a very real problem. Having lived there, yeah, it's pretty bad. But these types of people, the Rogans, the Carlsons, they always say, like, whenever you try to do anything about homelessness, whenever you spend money to deal with it, or, anything you do, they're always like, well, that didn't work, did it, losers, you liberals? That didn't work, did it? And he's like, yeah, it sort of didn't. Now, what's your solution exactly? This is the one part where they always fail. I mean, like, I've asked this any number of times to people online. Like, I will see conservatives say, well, you vote for liberals, this is what you get, and then I'll say, well, okay, so let's say I vote for Republicans. How are Republicans going to fix it? And they're always like, geez, well, they're by not being liberals. I think it's one very interesting thought experiment to go on here. I'll say frequently, I mean, I had a discussion with a guy recently, and we were talking about Sacramento, California. He said Sacramento's falling apart. There's more homeless people now. And I said, congratulations, you just became mayor of Sacramento. What are you going to do to solve the homeless problem? And he just dipped immediately. Never came back. This conversation had gone on for something like 30 replies over 10 hours or something. And he showed no signs of stopping until I said, okay, mayor of Sacramento, what's your plan now? And people kept coming into the thread. And I kept saying the same thing to them. Every one of them bowed out. Like, nobody wanted to answer that because it turns out it's much easier to complain about a problem, or laugh at it in this case, than to actually think about solutions. What are you going to do? You going to ban homeless people from sleeping outside? Well, where are they going to sleep? They're homeless. Are you going to criminalize them being homeless? Well, okay, now you got to house them, but it's in a jail, and once they get out of the jail, they're not going to be able to find jobs, which, about half of homeless people do have jobs. They're not going to be able to find jobs. I assume they'll probably want to commit more crime to survive. They might want to, rob people if they're hungry or whatever. So you're really what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're gonna round them up, put them in a concentration camp? In America, you could probably round them up feasibly. But if you put them Trump had this idea to round them up and put them in a camp out in the desert that he was not going to call a concentration camp, but which bore all the hallmarks of being one. And it's what are you going to do? Are you going to force them to stay there? Because I'm pretty sure that would be unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court would not like that a whole lot, at least for long term. You could probably get away with it for a few days. What are you going to do? What are you going to do when they're just well, bye-bye, and run off back to wherever they came from? Because that would be the outcome. They're not going to stay there, and what are you going to do with them there? What are you going to do when they get there? You're just going to keep them in these camps forever? What is the plan here? Obviously, when I think about camps where the undesirables are sent, that makes me think about much darker times in history, like the Nazis. So yeah, these people, they're just they'll laugh about solutions. They'll just be well, what are the liberals going to do to solve it? But then they don't have any solutions of their own. They just have laughter. And if they do have solutions, it's pretty much just okay, we'll throw them all in concentration camps, I guess. So thanks for that, everybody. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, or didn't enjoy it, or whatever. I know I wasted too much of your time already. I'll let you get back to it.